Now we're going to take you through a second example. This one's a little bit more complicated. We're going to be dealing with multiple sheets. If you go down the book, you can see in Student Project B. We're not going to talk about the specific concepts now. We're going to go straight into the procedures of each step of the way. So the first step is the get data stage, and we're going to get some data. It looks like a bike db-a, and then we're going to add these fields in, and we're going to open up the Power Query Editor. Very similar to what we did before, just a different example. So let's come over to Power BI, and the first thing we need to do is create a new blank report. So I'll simply go to File, New Report. And that's going to open up another instance of Power BI that we can use this. So now we're going to get some data from the data source. So the first step is choose the Get Data, choose an Excel workbook, and we're going to go to the C drive in the data folder, in the Power BI-1 folder, and we're going to choose the bike db-a, and we're going to choose Open. So that's going to connect to the data source. It's going to give me the sheets that are located in that Excel file. In this case, we want to use the customer sheet, the order sheet, and the product sheet. And then, of course, we have two options. We can load it directly to Power BI if we want to make no changes to the query editor. But if we choose Transform Data, that is actually going to open up the Power Query Editor to make those adjustments. So we're going to choose Transform Data. That opens up the Power Query Editor, and here's your customers table, your orders table, and your products table in the Power BI Query Editor. In Student Project B2, we're going to go through and make some changes to the Query Editor to adjust the data source. And so this is some of the things we're going to go through, make some changes to some column names. Looks like we're going to sort customer name. We're going to remove certain columns. And we can also look at the filters associated with that. And we're going to filter out just USA, Mexico, and Canada. Let's go over to Power BI and make those few changes. Let's say we don't need this long name right now. We're going to change this. And we can sort it by certain names if we want to, so that this stuff is more alphabetical or organized in that way. And let me see what else we can do on here. Let's take a look at, slide back here a little ways, and let's do something a little bit different. Back in the very back end here, we do have a few fields. This phone field, the fax, the email, and the website. Now these are actually useless fields for me because I really am never going to use them in the report. So I'll click on the phone field, and in the menus in the Home Ribbon tab, there's an option called Remove Columns. When I remove that column, it disappears from the Power BI Query Editor. It's still in the database, but it's not physically going to be loaded into Power BI. Now, if we deleted this filter called Remove Columns, that actually brings it back. So we're not really removing anything. We're just creating filters to adjust this information. If you hold your Shift key down and select them all, the fax, the email, and the website, I don't need any of these. I can simply remove all of those. And that means I've cleaned up the database or reduced the amount of information that I need in Power BI. There is one more filter adjustment I'm looking at here, because if you come over to these countries here, we may not want all these countries. So I'm going to select them all. I'm going to choose just Canada, Mexico, and the United States. So I'm just going to choose those three so I can filter this out and only see those particular records. And those are the ones that I have now in my table. When I'm done making this change, I'd say close and apply. And it closes this off and applies it to the Power BI tool. Let's take a look at the orders table. The only thing I can see in here that could be a problem is that the required date seems to be okay, but the order date came in as a non-date. So we need to switch this over to a date data type in order for it to be correct. And now every time I do a reload on this, it's going to bring in the new data, and if it comes in as a number, it will convert it over to a date field automatically. And again, you might have other fields in here that might be numeric fields, that it might convert it as a text field, and so those are the kind of things you're looking for. Any adjustments you want to make to that. But there's a ton of options up here. We're going to go through all these options in great detail later on. If you click on the products table, there doesn't seem to be any real issues with this. Everything looks okay, so maybe I don't need to make any changes to this particular field. Now, once we're done with this, we simply come up and say close and apply, and that will actually close off the query editor and apply the information to the Power BI desktop tool. And once it applies it, you can see our fields are going to get loaded on the right side. Now, if we need to go back and make some additional changes in the query editor, we would simply say transform data, choose transform data. It reopens the Power Query Editor. You can make whatever filter adjustments you want to make at this point. When I'm done making this change, I'd say close and apply, and it closes this off and applies it. Power BI tool. So now we're going to go through the data view to make some adjustments to a column, maybe create a new column. And so these are the procedures we're going to follow. Let's go over to Power BI. And we're going to choose the data view, which is the second icon on the left side, which kind of shows you the result of this. And you can see you have your customers table, your orders table, and your products table here. So the only adjustments that I can see at this point, or formulas that I might want to create, is in the orders table, there is a unit price and a quantity, but there isn't like a total. And I think the total is what I want to create so I can use those fields. So to do that, you want to create a new column. And we're going to call this column total. And that's going to include the unit price times the quantity. So you press the square bracket, choose the unit price, press the star key, which is a multiply, press the square bracket to add in the quantity. So it's going to take the unit price times the quantity, and it's going to create a new field called total. Click the little checkbox, and there creates my total right there. So you can see that the numbers look the same, but they do change once the data starts changing. And that's essentially one thing you can do at the data view level. The next step is to actually build the relationships. So we're going to go to the model view to start building these relationships. Verify our link in our tables. Here's a couple of ways we can establish the links. There's a couple of procedural type of things in here. Let's go over to Power BI to choose the model view, which is this link right here. And this shows me the three tables that I have added in here. As you can see, that this one here is connected through the product ID, but these did not connect up properly, and that was because we changed the name of the CID. So if the name remained customer ID, then this would happen automatically. But because I made that change, it did not do it, so we're going to have to manually set these up. So if your data sources do not link properly, then you're going to have to manually do this. So I'm going to drag the CID and drag it across and drop it on top of the customer ID, which establishes a link. When I highlight that link, you can see that those are now connected up. So sometimes the names aren't the same. Usually they are, but if they aren't, you'd have to manually set that up. If it wasn't set up properly, you're going to get wrong results. You can click on this line in between the two to get a more of a detailed relationship between these. And you see it says the orders table is through the customer ID, the customer's table to the CID, and looks like it's a many-to-one relationship and a single link. The next step in the process is to look at the Manage Links button. We're going to go back over to our visuals. In this particular relationship here, if you click on this little button at the top called Manage Relationships, that opens up this particular screen and it shows you the different fields that are and how they're connected up. And so you can adjust them down here and things of that nature. But the other thing I mentioned is you can click on this little line in between the two, and that will actually open up that relationship screen to make sure you can adjust that. Student project B7 is going to create a clustered column chart. It looks like we're going to bring in the country field and the total field in here. Looks like we got to do some filtering on this one here. Let's go over to Power BI. And let's jump back to the reports view. And we're going to choose the clustered column chart in the visualizations area. It looks like we're going to put in from the customers table, we're going to choose the country field, drag that and drop that on that visual. But since these fields are related, we're going to go over to the orders table and we're going to put the total field in there as my numeric field, which creates my visual report. But you can see there's a record that gets stuck in here called blank. That's something, maybe an error or something like that. So we could filter that out. I could go over to the filters on this visual and remove that blank in this manner to do that. Now, another thing you could have done here is we could actually go through and turn them both back on, but we could actually put this on filters on all pages. So if I was simply drag the country field into the bucket called filters on all pages, and then I did the blank, that means that anytime I create a report on the page, that blank will no longer appear. On student project B8, we're going to create another clustered column chart, but this time we're going to pull the data from the products table. We're going to use the total value from the orders table. Let's come over to Power BI. Click in your white area to make sure nothing's highlighted. Choose a clustered column chart. Move it up to place. In this case, we're going to be putting the product name and the axis, and we're going to be putting the total in the values bucket. And you can see how we've got the helmet and saddles and racing bikes are all on the same chart. In student project B9, we're going to create a text slicer. So we're going to choose the slicer icon. Looks like we're going to put the product name in that slicer. And we're going to show you how the slicer basically works. We might go in and show you a few formatting options associated with that. Come over to Power BI. Look in your white area to make sure nothing's highlighted. Choose the little slicer icon. And we can kind of move that up into place. And in the slicer icon, it looks like there's only one field. So we're going to say, how do we want to slice this? In this case, we want to slice it by product name so that we can put in these values and we can filter this and the data will filter down on its own. Now, the one thing I want to show you is a really important element is this, that you have to hold the control key down to get these filters to apply. That's a little bit clumsy, but if you come over to the format tools here, come down to the selection controls, turn off the multi-select, turn on the select all option, and that's a little cleaner slicer. So I can actually click on this select all, and I don't have to use my control key to highlight the others. So it looks like we're going to create another text slicer, but this is going to be based on country. Let's come over to Power BI. Click in your whiter to make sure nothing's highlighted. Choose your slicer icon. And this time it looks like we're going to put in the country field into the bucket, which does it this way. Now let's go through and change our slicer selection controls so that we can get it back to the way we like it. A little bit cleaner layout. Now we're going to student project B11, which is going to create a map. Let's come over to Power BI. Click in your white area to make sure nothing's highlighted. Choose the little map icon. In this case, we're going to put in the location bucket the country field from the customers table. We might even put country into the legend. The size bucket, we're going to put in the total field into the size to change the size of the dot. And so you can see that what we have is we've got just Canada, Mexico, and USA. So those are the only records we have in our particular report. Student project B12, it looks like we're going to create a card and we're going to put the total value in there. Let's come over to Power BI. Click on the white area to make sure nothing's highlighted. Choose the little card icon, the 1, 2, 3. And in the field list, we're going to come to the orders table and drag the total field into the card. And there we go. Student project B13, we're going to create another card, but this time we're going to put the quantity in there. Let's jump over to Power BI. Click in your white area to make sure nothing's highlighted. Choose the little 1, 2, 3 card icon. And we're going to come down into the orders table, find the quantity, and drop that into the card in this manner. In student project B14, it looks like we're going to look at the end result and rearrange our cards accordingly. So we'll put our product name up here with our product slicer, the cards over here, and the totals down here. So let's jump back over to Power BI and rearrange it that way. So here's the country. Put my cards over here somewhere. Right up there. Here's my other card. We'll stick that up there. Here is your total by product. Here's your slicer. Kind of line those up properly. Here's our country slicer. So we can put these and sort of line these up next to them that way. And put this one up like this. And we'll move this country field up a bit to and space these out a little bit better. Again, you want to sort of rearrange things on the screen so that you can adjust the slicer according this way, or you can simply select all and adjust these in that manner. The student project B15, we're going to talk about filters. And so even though we have the slicers applied, we can still use the filters to adjust things across everything. So let's go to Power BI and take a look. So we can actually look at a specific visual. Like if I click on this visual here, I could adjust the filters this way on screen, or I can simply come over here and adjust these this way. So if I choose the lock, for example, and I turn them all on, but I turn off the lock, then the lock simply disappears from this visual. But you notice the lock does remain in this one because we didn't do it on the page level. If I were to apply this to the page level, then the lock would disappear from both of them. So now we're going to take a look at some of the format options available. We're going to go to and select a clustered column chart. Doesn't matter which one. Change some data colors around. We're going to change the title around, make a few changes there, put some border out there, and then basically look at the end result of that. Let's go to Power BI. So select a visual, one of them, possibly this one. And we're going to go to the roller brush. And it looks like we can change some of the data colors around. If we want to change it, select them all. And of course, we'll make one last change to there. So that sort of changes the colors around a little bit. We can also come down and look at the title. Change the name if you want. We can center it. We could change the font color if we wanted to. Change the text size. Make a little larger title. We can also add a border. Put a border around it. And that's kind of how you would adjust that particular visual. Student project B17 looks like we're going to go through and format the slicer. So we can change font colors of the slicer. You can also change the layout, maybe use the format painter to copy from the country field, the clustered column chart, use that style. So we can go through and adjust them in that manner. Let's go to Power BI and click on the product name slicer. If I want to make some specific adjustments to this, I could come over, and we talked earlier about the selection controls, how we would turn this off and turn that on. You can go back and make other changes to the title possibly. Look at the items and change the outline between these. So if I want to change the outline a little bit, you can put different format options in here. So, there's a lot of little adjustments you can make to each visual. But we also want to go through and take this one as my model and apply that to all the others. So we'll choose our format painter, choose on each one of these. And so it's going to inherit that style. So we have a common look and layout of our visuals. Student project B18 is going to be the publishing stage. It looks like we're going to save the file off as BikeDB report, and then we're going to simply click on the publish button here to log in. choose My Workspace as the publish, and we're going to go over to the Power BI tool. Come over to Power BI and take a look at that. So here is our report. We have to save it off first. We're going to go to File, Save As. We're going to call this BikeDB report. Save it in the data folder and the Power BI-1 folder. Choose Save. And now we're ready to publish. So we would click on the Publish icon, choose My Workspace. You can say Success if it did it correctly. You can choose Open the BikeDB report. That's going to open up the Power BI Web Service tool. And we can look at our reports to see how these reports are laid out. We're now going to create a dashboard from our reports that we've published to the Web Server tool. So the steps we're going to go through is this is going to basically view the information, and you can see the different ways you can view this information at the report level. We're going to create a dashboard. We're going to share the dashboard, and we're going to create a link to the dashboard in the reports level. Remember, you can't do this in the dashboard. You have to do this in the report. Let's come over to Power BI. I'm going to choose this little link here. That's going to open up Power BI Web Service tool. And you can see the fields we have over here. So if we're going to create a dashboard from our reports, you can click on this, and if I click this little pin tool, that will actually pin it to the dashboard. Well, I don't want to put it to my first report. I can put it either to a new report, or I can put it to my first. So we can create a new one. We can call this BikeDB report, choose the pin tool, and that allows us to pin that. Now let's go ahead and pin our slicer. If you click on the slicer, you notice there is no pin on the slicer. And the reason why is because the slicer is a filter. Power BI dashboards do not support filters, so you're not able to pin this particular visual. But I can click this one here and pin that one over to the BikeDB report and choose Pin. Go to the dashboard to take a look at that, and these are the visuals I pinned up here. Now we're going to go through these menus in much more detail a little later. You can see that in my data sets I have a BikeDB report and I have my first report. So those are the two data sets, or the database that's been uploaded to the Power BI web server. Looks like I have my reports here, my BikeDB and my first report. If I click on that BikeDB report, it displays it, and of course if I want to share this, I can click the share button this way. I can also do an embed based on a website or portal, just like we did in the previous exercise. And on our dashboard, again, we can share it, but we can't actually create a hyperlink to that particular visual. And so that sort of concludes how this fits together. Going through with two examples would be very helpful to see it a second time through. A different example, a little bit larger of a database. It's very similar kind of procedures, but sometimes going through it a couple times, showing you just some different options as we went through it, helps a lot.